Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me. Tonight, tonight on the East Coast, that is, I'm delighted to welcome you to a conversation with artist Sarah Brayer. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a second-generation dealer of contemporary Japanese prints. And I'm really excited that my first conversation is with the multi-talented artist, Sarah Brayer. We're having all kinds of audio issues tonight, which I'm sorry about, but I hope that we will be able to power through this somehow. I met Sarah Brayer a long time ago and wanted to give you a little bit of background before we start our program. Sarah was born in the United States, got her BA in studio arts from Connecticut College, and ended up in Japan in 1979. Tonight, I'm going to be asking Sarah all kinds of questions, and I hope that you will put your questions in the Q&A box, which you can see over there. Now, because I'm doing all of this, I must find Sarah Brayer and make her a co-host so that we can make our program happen. Hold on one minute, please. Let's see. So some technological thing happened, and I'm hoping that Sarah will now join us, because Sarah, I made you a co-host.
Hi there. Can you hear me, Allison?
I can hear you, and here you are. So as I started telling people, you are in Kyoto, in the beautiful studio that your husband, the talented architect Masa Fujiwara, built for you. What's it like in Kyoto?
Today we can hear the cicadas in the background singing their end of summer song. It's hot and humid. It should be about 97 today, but that's better than 100. Yeah.
So, Sarah, what I thought, because this is supposed to be an intimate conversation between the two of us, is that perhaps you could take us through the beginning of how you got to Japan, your early work, and then I will pepper you with questions, and then we will have our attendees ask questions too.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you all for joining, and please take this as a personal hello to all of you. Okay, so we'll start with coming to Japan. And I want to show you a few pieces as I talk.
Great.
So I arrived in Japan about 6 months after graduating from college, and I had a backpack, a one-way ticket, and $1,000 in traveler's checks. And the idea was to hitchhike around Japan, but that didn't really go very far. It was difficult to hitchhike in Japan, even in 1980. And after about a month, I ended up in Kyoto and rented a small apartment where I was able to set up an etching studio in my half-mat kitchen. Half a mat is about 3 by 3 feet. So this is an example of an early print that it's called Rainy Market Day. And it depicts the marketplace in my neighborhood. I lived in Okazaki, near Heian Shrine. And I was really taken with what to me looked like something from the 19th century, women with umbrellas shopping in a little local market. And it had a lot of atmosphere, and it was very different from what I had seen growing up in Rochester, New York. So my early work was really very focused on the new world that was around me.
Sarah, what type of, had you studied etching in college?
Yes, I studied printmaking from a young age, and then my junior year, when I was in London studying, I learned how to do etching on ceramics. And I became very entranced with the idea of doing, not etching on ceramics, but etching on paper, like this. Here we have Moonlit Street, and I thought you might enjoy seeing my first moon print. It was done in 1981, and this is the walk from my little apartment that had the half-mat kitchen to my new studio, which I rented, that was also 4.5 mats, and it was about a 10-minute walk into down this street. So this
Was it strange because there probably weren't so many foreigners working in Kyoto then? Was it strange? I mean, would people stop you on the street and ask you what you were doing?
Sometimes the kids would come up to me and want to touch my hair, if you can believe that, and say, it told me I had golden hair.
Oh.
Yeah, that was kind of nice.
Now, I remember, and I told people in my intro that you're from Rochester, New York, where it snows a lot. And one of the things that always captivated me about your work was the effect, how you made snow look so real.
Oh, I'd like to tell you about that. So everybody can see the snow up close. This is called Snow Passage, and it depicts an alleyway in Kyoto near my studio. And the snow was the result of kind of frustrations I had trying to make white dots on my etching plate. And I tried at first burnishing the plate, and that didn't really work. It wasn't white enough. So I was kind of racking my brain out one day, and then I remembered the printing trick of putting printer's chalk on the edge of the plate. It's a kind of whiting, a powder, and when you put it around the edge of the plate, it makes the edge very, very white. And sometimes when you make a mistake and it will streak across the plate and leave a white mark. And I thought, oh, that's it. That's how I can get the snow. So I had a little jar of baby powder, Johnson's baby powder in my studio. So I went and grabbed that and tried it out. You know, I sprinkle it on the plate on top of the inked plate as the plate is sitting on the etching press. And wherever the snow or the powder lands, it acts as a mask so that the ink does not transfer to the paper. It remains on the plate.
I actually realized that when we started out with 2 early prints that were black and white.
Yes.
But when did color come into your work?
Well, color, one of the things I did early on from my days in Kyoto was to sketch around the city with watercolor.
Oh, wow.
Here's an early watercolor, sakura along the Kamo River. And I would have, set up on the river with my French easel and painted on location. So that was the best way to get the atmospheric effects of the sky and the changing light. So
well, and light has always been so important in your work. That's something that I know we're going to talk about in a bit.
Yes, that's always been the unifying interest. Here's another example of this is a night scene. About this time of year, actually, the Kamo River from downtown Kyoto, where you see the lights over on this side. Those are the outdoor elevated restaurants that are open along Pontocho in the summer.
Right.
You get added reflections in the water, and it's very festive looking. So.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, so I, in terms of adding color to my etching, that started when I went and worked with Kathy Caraccio in New York in 1984. And she basically taught me how to work with color aquatint.
Was your work different when you came to New York, or were you staying in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, I was fascinated by New York night scenes, street scenes, buildings, cars whizzing by, you know. So yes, it did change. But the actual, you know, I had already been in Japan about, I guess, 6 or 7 years, and you know, my way of looking at the world was being influenced by what was around me. You know, so I liked the aerial views of, say, the bridges from the World Trade Tower, or I would look for kind of reflective situations on the streets that I thought would make interesting pictures. And that's also when I started to make paper, to make paperworks as a serious art form. Was during a trip to New York. I went and visited the studio at Dudonnet Paper Mill in Soho. And as I was watching the paper makers in the studio, actually they were working with an artist, and I watched the process, and something inside me said, "Oh, paper, yes, Japan, you're in Japan. What about doing this in Japan, you know, using the Japanese washi?" So I got very excited by that germ of an idea, and I went back to Kyoto, and I immediately went to my paper proprietor and said, you know, what do you think about this idea? I really would like to explore paper. Do you know any place? And he said to me, kind of nonchalantly, he said, well, yeah, we could go to my brother's place. I said, great, when? You have a place? So, you know, off we went to the mill in Echizen, where I still work today. And as I walked in there, it was just amazing. It was it may sound strange, but it was kind of the place I imagined, because I wanted the big screens, you know, the screens for making paper doors. And that it was that kind of studio.
Maybe you can tell people what the size of the paper doors is, because Sarah's talking about fusuma, which are sliding doors.
So interestingly, a paper door is the same size as a tatami mat. So
that's 3 feet by 6 feet, right?
3 by 6, right? And so, you know, Japanese architecture is constructed modularly, so the doors match the mats. So they had the screens, or they have the screens that size. And one of the ways I like to work with it is to use the entire frame, so that you get, you know, the edge of the washi paper. Usually Fusuma doors are trimmed. They take off 10 centimeters.
This is sort of jumping in a bit, but somebody had a question about poured washi. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to just show you washi in different forms.
Great.
Okay. So this is not actually poured. This is just, well, it is poured. It's poured onto a screen, but it's not poured into an image. So this would be plain mulberry fiber. And the long strands that you see have not been beaten. And the shorter, more translucent fiber is the same material, but it's been beaten longer. So I make up a special, you know, brew of paper, exactly how I want it. And then I have to test the actual thickness of it. Here's an example of a piece of the washi that I print on. And so this would be similar to one of the panels in some of my moon pieces that we're going to talk about later. And you can see the fibers through and the ink on top of it. And then the final example I want to show you is, this is the same material. This is kozo fiber, but it's very long. And what I've done in this case is pulled the fiber into shapes. And so this is a kind of way of working that I'm using now to do my Constellation series.
And I was hoping that that you would talk to us a little bit about maybe what's behind you, if we can
Okay.
get a talk about what's on the wall behind you.
Okay. So I'm gonna just go back a little bit. This is an early moon piece from 2010. It's called Moon Glow, and I have this up just to show you where the jump-off point was into the luminosity series. So I was working with the moon as an image, reflecting on water, but I had not yet discovered how to put the glow into the paper. And then over on the back here, I have several pieces from a recent trip that I took to Namibia and South Africa. The top is African skies, and it's a response that I had to seeing rock paintings in Namibia dating back 2,000 years. And that seemed to link very closely with the idea of constellations. Here we have this is called African Dream, the piece below with the two animals. There's a zebra and a monkey. And of course, I was in Africa. I had to do some animals. And then over to the left of Moon Glow are two pieces. There's an adult cheetah on top and the zebra below. And both of these pieces were made using washi, but they involve tearing the washi and gluing it in different layers. Whereas some of the other pieces on the wall are actually poured washi. So
And for everybody,
with material and pouring it onto a screen.
for everybody watching tonight, we will be sending images so that you can see these pieces up close and personal. So we'll be sending that after the conversation. Was that the first time you'd been to Africa?
No, it's the second time. We went to Tanzania.
I know that you've been to Bhutan.
Yes. Yeah, Bhutan is spectacular for the nature and the waterfalls. And of course, the Tibetan Buddhism.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit about Midnight Moon? Because this is the newest work that you've just completed, right?
Right, that's right. So let me just bring it closer to the camera.
Okay.
So Midnight Moon. This is a scene I often see as I'm coming home at night to our house. The moon will often be setting off in the western sky. And one of the things that I get extremely excited about is the times that you can also see the penumbrum, or the round shape behind the crescent. So that to me is just, it's really an amazing thing to see. And so I wanted to capture the relationship between kind of the two moons. I mean, it's really one moon, but because I'm working with it in a layered way, the penumbrum is a round disc of phosphorescent infused paper that glows slightly blue at night, and the crescent on the surface glows slightly sort of greenish yellow, and it's a stronger glow due to the fact that it's on the surface. It's the closest to us as viewers. The paper that I use in the background is, again, the same mulberry fiber, and the fiber has intentional gaps in the piece. That's to give the feeling of the stars. And before I actually adhere the printed elements to the blue backing sheet, I paint each sheet by hand, so you can see the variation of the blues. And that enables me to really control the different values in the blue, and that's important to me. So that's
How many layers of paper did you use?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's also a layer under the blue. Yeah. So anyway, I made 32, and it was a project that it took several months because I don't know, there were just so many little hand things I had to manage as as I was moving the edition along. You know, each one is gets sort of you know, full attention. You know, there's a lot of handwork, in other words, and each one has, of course, different paper, the way the fibers disperse on the screen determines.
Well, and everyone is going to be different. I think that's what people like about your work, is that it's that layer of hand addedness. I would like you to talk a little bit about your phosphorescent work. We had one question from somebody who was worried about how toxic this could be.
Oh, well, thank you for your concern. Actually, the material that I use is a non-toxic substance. It's a non-reactive compound, and it's capable of absorbing shortwave length light from the sun or from ultraviolet. And then it slowly releases longer wave light back in the visible range. And so it's visible in the dark. It's also visible during the day, but you know, it's much more dramatic if you turn the lights off. And this, it's processed in a lab, so there are no animals involved in its, you know, manufacturing, and it's very stable. It is non-toxic, it is non-radioactive, and you know, the technology has come a long way for phosphorescence in the last 20 years. So, and I'm careful, you know, when I use it. Like any powder that you use, you have to be careful not to breathe it. Or
what's the powder made out of, though?
It's made out of a strontium aluminate.
Okay.
You can all look that up.
Yeah. Sarah, have you ever had anybody who wanted to study with you?
Well, I finished a 5-year teaching stint at Seika University, which is an art school right across the valley from me. And so I was teaching a paper studio class there to Japanese students, which was really great. But that contract is now over. So,
but did you see students who wanted to follow and do the same kind of art that you're making, or not?
I think you know, they were still really forming as young artists. And one of the beauties of the course was that they learned all aspects, including traditional sheet making, paper making, which was really great. So they had another teacher from a paper village who came in and taught that aspect. And I was teaching more of the artistic, you know, what can you do with the fiber when you pour it on the screen? So, you know, I think that, I mean, it's a challenge right now. Art departments in universities, especially for the more hands-on work, like printmaking and papermaking, many of the students are moving over to computer arts.
A lot of printmakers have said that to me, that young people really are interested in photography.
Well, yeah, that's what you grew up with, right? I mean, I grew up making Christmas cards with my mother in the basement by hand, right? So, you know, it's just what we had then.
When you were showing us the little Kozo fibers before, was that something that you thought of yourself to stretch up the fibers? Is there any other artist who works like that?
Well, I always hesitate to say that there's no one else who does what I do, but it was a logical extension of what I was already doing. And often as I'm working, you know, I like to see what does the material say on its own. Now, I don't mean a voice, like in my ear, but how does it express itself in its most simplest form without me really doing too much to it? And that's really one of the things that I do truly love the material that I'm working with. And I'm constantly amazed at the versatility and the fact that, somebody came up with the idea, somebody looked at the mulberry tree, and they probably saw a fibrous bark, that looks not so different from that drawing I showed you, and thought, of the possibilities of what could be done with it.
Have you ever had, besides the baby powder incident, have you ever had any other accidents that happened as you were working and then you thought, oh, I'm going to go with this?
Well, there are always accidents. The best laid plans go to the wayside. Sometimes things would happen like the screen would fall off, shift off of its angled support, and the whole image would move, and that would give me an idea. Oh, if I make it jump, I can get like a different sort of look. And I've had the experience with working with aquatint where I was in a room sprinkling rosin around for my waterfall series. And I noticed this brush that had, very funky hairs. I thought, I wonder what that brush could do. And it turned out it was the perfect, waterfall in action, brush that could draw the streaks of water, things like that, I mean, they're small little mistakes that then get incorporated into a larger idea.
Now, I know that you just showed us Midnight Moon, but is there anything that you're working on right now? Your brand newest inspiration?
Okay, I want to just show you one piece I just completed.
Oh, that is different.
So this is called Summer Lift. And again, I was drawing with the mulberry fibers to create the different white forms in the piece. And this is, I've been working also with the idea of cells and how things connect, because it's actually really interesting to see how you can connect the fibers into one continuous piece, which is what the clouds are in this picture.
And is that the same type of paper that you used in Midnight Moon?
Yeah, actually it is. It's just this paper doesn't have gaps. It's pressed flat, whereas Midnight Moon is more dimensional. It's got a bumpy surface. But again, it's the same mulberry. And it's, every time I add the color, I add it in a different way. But yeah, same material. I'm a Kozo girl. I love it.
So one person asked, how are you supposed to frame one of the phosphorescent pieces?
Oh, that's a great question.
That soft glow at night, how does that work?
So if you frame it using a regular plexiglass, which will then, keep the dust off the piece, the amount of light that reaches the piece is adequate for it to glow at night. If you use UV cut glass, it cuts out too much and it won't glow. The other option is to mount it on a panel and not put glass over it. But I think long term, you will be happier with how the artwork looks in 5 or 10 years if you put it behind glass, plexiglass. Now, as far as the charge on the phosphorescence, you can charge up the piece by putting it in sunlight for a minute. That will completely charge it up. However, if it's hanging on your wall, you really don't want it on a wall that gets hit with sun continuously. So what I recommend is either use a small UV flashlight, which you can just glow on the piece for 10 seconds. It's an adequate amount of time, and you can charge it that way. Or in a room like my studio here has skylights, and there's enough ambient light from the skylight for the works to glow. However, they glow softly, and the glow diminishes over time. So it will actually glow for 8 hours in the visible range, but the first 10 or 15 minutes, it's much brighter. And that's also one of the beauties, I feel, of the series, is that actually, you know, there's an element of change, and your own perception changes. You know, actually, we change more than the work changes, in fact. And that's really interesting to me.
Of course.
As you look at it. Yeah.
But so that phosphorescence will stay forever?
Apparently, the phosphorescence is so stable, it will probably outlast whatever you put it in. So, yes. Yeah.
That is so interesting. I think I'm going to now go to the questions that people have been sending you. And of course, there are many people from all over the world, Sarah, from 5 countries who send you their best. But let's see. Okay, we covered a lot of those. One person wanted to know if there are any specific traditions in Japanese art that you're following. I mean, you are an outsider, you're an American, but you've made your home in Japan. Are there any Japanese traditions that you were inspired by?
Well, I think, you know, the print tradition is very strong here. And of course, so is paper. But I'm not really, I haven't really fit into one particular school or genre. I think because I'm a bit of a mixed bag, you know. I mean, I have a Western art education, and the way that I maybe approach something is like a Westerner. But now I've lived in this country so long. I've lived here now for 40 years, so twice as long as I've lived in the US. And so, you know, the way that I view materials or color or just the atmosphere around me has changed or been influenced by my surroundings.
Somebody from Mexico writes to tell that I'm working with an indigenous papermaking and printmaking studio in Mexico. They harvest invasive Brazilian water lilies from their lake and wetlands to make the paper. The textures of your paper come through so strongly. Unlike most indigenous groups in Mexico, they're governed by the moon, not the sun. So that means nonviolent and gender equal. That resonates with your beautiful moon imagery. And so he wants you to look up Taller Delirio, which is this graphic studio.
Oh, great. That sounds beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I would love to.
I don't know if you've ever gone to Mexico on any of your trips, but it seems like some place that you should make a point of stopping in at.
Yes, right.
And then another question is, what are you using to paint between the layers on the moon piece? The indigo or mineral pigments?
Oh, on say the print. So I use a combination of liquid pigments, including indigo, but I also will use ultramarine, and I'll sometimes use indothrone blue, just to get a range.
Another person wanted to have another look at the large piece behind your left shoulder. So if you turn,
Okay.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that piece? It's huge.
Which one do you mean?
Yep, that one.
The scroll?
Not the glow one, but the one on the other side of the animals. The long vertical.
This one.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is a great example of a poured door-sized piece. It's a large swirl of a sky, and you can really see the fiber as it dances across the screen. So when I made it, I started with there's an umber, a brown colored sheet. And so that went down first. And then on top of that, I poured white, blue, and black. So I have big vats, full of color that are waiting for me. And once the base sheet is poured, usually 3 of us have to pour it around a big screen. Then the other colors are put into a slurry of autororo, which is a viscous, mucus-like material from the hibiscus plant. I can make a pool of that. And as the pool is sitting on top of the base sheet, I pour the other colors in and let them swirl and move them with my hands. So
how do they dry?
What?
How do they dry? When you've poured this...
So after the piece is completed and it's still sitting on the screen, the bottom, the frame comes off, it's lifted up on the screen, it's cooched onto a stack of wet paper. It goes through a hydraulic press. It's taken out of the press and it's brushed onto a board and dries in the air. And that process that I just described is done by master paper makers in the factory where I work, because it involves more than, it's a 2 or 3 person job.
But the way that you've mounted that there, is it meant to look like a hanging scroll?
Yes, absolutely. So it has a mounting at the bottom and the top. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you want to share with everybody before we bid our farewells.
Well, I just want to thank you all for coming, and I wish that I could physically invite you all into my space. A camera is the best we can do right now, but I so appreciate your interest. And many of you have supported me for numerous years in my various endeavors. So I just want to thank you and tell you how important it is to have you as part of my life.
Well, thank you so much. And everyone, I apologize for the echo. I love hearing Sarah and I love hearing myself, but I don't know if I like hearing us twice. But thank you so much for joining us. And as I said, we will be sending you close-up images of the pieces that we have seen tonight. So thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.